matter where you turn in financial markets these days, you will find China. Just today, a Shanghai court sentenced 4 Rio Tinto executives to prison terms. Meantime, the currency story continues to play out, with members of Congress telling the White House to impose sanctions if the Chinese yuan is not allowed to strengthen. With us now is Charles Freeman, a Chinese expert at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. He previously served as the chief China trade negotiator for the USTR in the Bush administration. Charles, good morning to you. Let's talk about the prison sentencing in Shanghai. These 4 gentlemen going to prison for bribery. Is this a warning of sorts to foreign companies? Because you hear everybody saying bribery is just a way of doing business in China.
Well, I mean, there is certainly a lot of corruption, a lot of bribery that goes on in China as in other places. You know, the Chinese court system tends to do things, making examples of people, sending, you know, the proverbial.
During the course of the trial, Mr. Hu.
The proverbial sheep up for slaughter, and that happens occasionally. You know, we don't know what the story was with this case. We really, honestly, I don't know whether these guys were guilty or not, but clearly they're not alone in bribing officials or others in China.
All right, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the yuan. I mean, as Erik says, it's hard to talk about China without discussing the trade implications, without discussing currency levels. We had Nouriel Roubini last week saying there's a 50% chance that China gets labeled as a currency manipulator. Would you put the odds higher or lower than 50%?
No, I think that's a reasonable bet, because I don't think Treasury knows what it wants to do yet. So 50-50 is probably as good a bet as any. I think you can look at the numbers, and given where the exports are in terms of net exports coming down in the last couple months, you can argue that it's hard to call China a currency manipulator now, but this is a political decision ultimately, and I think politics has a big role in Treasury's decision.
We know that you worked out in the last Bush administration, but do you find it odd at all that it's the Democrats pressuring President Obama? I mean, he's facing basically pressure from his own party to go through with this label.
Well, I mean, there's an equation of currency undervaluation and manufacturing jobs, which may or may not have any basis in reality. But if you're a Democratic politician and you're trying to cater to a labor base, you're looking for any angle that you can play, and this is certainly a pretty potent one with the labor forces.
Charles, you're the Chinese expert. Tell us, what is Premier Wen Jiabao thinking? Does he really care what Sander Levin has to say? Does he really care what Charles Schumer has to say? Or is he more reactive to internal pressure from inside China?
Well, anybody who thinks that the Chinese premier or the president wakes up and worries what Chuck Schumer or Sandy Levin have to say probably isn't in touch with the pressures of the domestic Chinese politics. I mean, there are enormous imbalances and disparities and potential political pitfalls for the Chinese leadership, and they're focusing on those. Yes, they don't want to run afoul of the United States. They don't want to jeopardize their export juggernaut by angering people on Capitol Hill, but that's probably not their #1 priority.
Charles, quick last question here. We're, of course, focused very much on Apple's iPod this week. I'm wondering, in tech land, if you think Google made a mistake for being so public in its argument with the Chinese government.
Well, I can't comment on internal decision-making at the company. Certainly, if you look at the level of frustration that many American businesses and foreign businesses in general are feeling in China right now, you can understand that frustration bubbling over into outright action, such as was taken by Google.